On this episode of Breakdown, we asked Joe Trotter, the American Legislative Exchange Council's Energy, Environment, and Agriculture Task Force Director, if the Biden administration's approach to overseeing America's energy industry has gotten out of hand.
The critical components, the raw materials that go into all energy thing, electric vehicles, solar panels, wind projects, there are resources in the United States that we could use to go ahead, process these things, and turn them into these major energy infrastructure projects. But the administration has gone ahead and put a kibosh on every attempt to do so. And it's happening all over the country. We've seen attacks on permits for copper mines, for rare earth mineral mines, for oil, gas, coal. And now, most recently, you're seeing this enormous attack from the EPA in the form of a regulation that would essentially close all coal power plants. And while you can debate coal either which way, coal is an essential part of the energy mix in our country. What we saw in 2022, the United States and the world was having a love affair with natural gas, and natural gas is great. But when we had international instability thanks to the Russian attack on Ukraine, we saw the markets totally upended for natural gas in terms of pricing. So states that almost entirely relied on natural gas to heat homes, power its generators, just all their energy needs, those states saw enormously sky-high prices. And now, basically, for the states where energy was most affordable, they had backup coal generators. And now what you're seeing is, by regulatory fiat, the elimination of these power generation sources.
We are essentially seeing a two-pronged attack on everything involving America's energy. The first is on the traditional power generation, such as like actual natural gas and coal plants. But we are also seeing an attack on the ability for America to go ahead and mine and harvest the raw natural resources needed to upgrade our energy infrastructure.
Now, but with this push that they have overall, I mean, there's the big thing, we want to go green, we want to go electric, we want to make it all happen. But before that all happens, before they can go green, they still have to produce the power. And it seems that they haven't answered the question as how are they going to generate that without the current setup?
Well, the answer is they aren't. America does import some electricity from Canada, for example, in states like Vermont and the Northeast. We do share a bit of a grid, but Canada is also having its own problems. But in the short term, we are shutting down, or at least the administration is attempting to shut down these traditional generators without having a good backup. In fact, we have a model policy on this that is passed in a number of states now that says you cannot shut a legacy power system down until its replacement is online.
Well, you think that'd be common sense?
You would think it would be common sense, but as they say, common sense is not always common.
But then where are they actually expecting? Are they truly expecting the green energy sources, which to this point we've seen haven't been able to produce, at least at the rates that they claimed that they would? We're seeing that in Germany. We're seeing that over in Scandinavia, all throughout the EU, actually. So how are they expecting that to happen here without relying on the traditional energy sources?
Frankly, it's just a pipe dream. It's not happening. It's within our lifetime, probably never going to happen. You need a firm baseload power. And that comes from dispatchable energy. Dispatchable meaning it can be started, stopped, it can be transmitted on demand as opposed to intermittent, such as wind and solar, and to some extent even hydro, although that splits the difference a little bit. You need it for the baseload power. Wind and solar are never going to be baseload power.
Well, what is our breakdown here in the United States? I'm not down to the decimal points and all that, but basically, what are we looking at by way of coal power production, nuclear power production, hydro, green, whatever?
So it very much depends state by state and region by region. But in general, natural gas and nuclear are the two largest sources of generation. Natural gas is definitely the largest source, nuclear close behind. Coal is less than 20% at this point, but it's an important backup when something happens, such as the entire natural gas market gets upended due to international stability. There is also this war on nuclear, where the Biden administration declared vast swaths of Arizona, the specific areas that have the best uranium fuel for our reactors, off limits using his National Monument Authority. So we are currently getting the vast majority of our uranium from Kazakhstan and Russia.
Kazakhstan and Russia?
Yes, so that is where we are getting the vast majority of our nuclear fuel.
Is it cheaper to get it from there? Is it easier to get it from? I mean, what's the main reason?
So the main reason we had that program to begin with, it had to do with the end of the Cold War. We basically said we want to make sure that as the Soviet Union collapses, that all this nuclear fuel doesn't wind up in the wrong hands. So the United States said, we're going to go ahead and buy as much of your nuclear fuel as possible so it winds up with us as opposed to a less desirable state actor. And that agreement has continued to this day.
Is that fueling what we currently have by way of nuclear plants, or is this stuff that we're bringing in and storing with the idea of one day we will build these nuclear power plants?
That is what is currently fueling it. Now, it is a majority of where we're getting our fuel. We have excellent uranium reserves in the United States, but the Biden administration just made it all off limits.
But if that's the way that things play out, then why are we trying to build towards this future that we're never going to be able to reach?
It's all about short-term electoral politics. You have the initial war on fossil fuels. That was okay, fine, it happens. It's a political football. Then you have the going after the uranium and the mining industry in general. Okay, fine. Also politics. Not great for the country, but on top of all of that, the Biden administration has revoked or decided to start re-reviewing permits for things like copper mines, rare earth mineral mines, all sorts of mining that is essential to his own Inflation Reduction Act green technology goals. It is an all-out assault on all forms of electrical generation.
You have certain states that are pushing harder than others. Obviously, California is pushing harder than Alabama. You have Washington and Oregon that are making their moves as well. The problem that we have there is, though, they can't keep the power on for what they're trying to do now, much less, I think it's 2030 that California is, we're only selling electric from here on out. How are they going down the nuclear path? Or, I mean, how are they planning on having more energy?
At the end of the day, the only way in order to create this firm dispatchable power that will be able to essentially make the electrification of everything happen, assuming that's where it actually goes, the only way to do that is to with current technology, is to significantly increase the nuclear baseload, especially if you don't want any emissions. The problem is just getting the initial permits for a single nuclear facility, if it even can happen, is between 10 and 20 years before you're even breaking ground. And nuclear plants don't just suddenly pop out of nowhere. They take years, if not decades, to build.
And is this with the standard nuclear plants that we're all used to, or about the smaller, what are this, SMR, small
modular nuclear reactors?
Yeah.
So currently, I'm talking about both. Small modular nuclear reactor technology is in its infancy. It is just beginning to be built, beginning to be deployed. It's been researched for a long time, but they have to go through the exact same, almost exact same regulatory process before they can be built.
And you say that our main deposits that we have of uranium are down in Arizona. Is that it? Are there other aspects that were also being restricted from utilizing?
So the interesting thing about the Arizona uranium is it's not necessarily where most of it is where the highest quality is,
Okay.
the best fuel. So you have other deposits, but it will take a lot of work to get it up. But in addition to just the nuclear fuel itself, you need wiring, you need backup generators, you need a whole host of other critical infrastructure to make sure that that fuel actually gets to the customer. And all of those materials, the mining of all of those materials, is essentially being embargoed to the American people by the Biden administration.
Okay, I want to switch gears a little, stay within the same lane, but in a different direction. On the coal power side of things, and we were talking before about the Willow Oil Project or the Mountain Valley Natural Gas. You were telling us that 20% of America's power, roughly, comes from coal, but that's getting cut back and restricted as well.
So when it comes to current coal power, the EPA released a new regulation saying that these plants must have a carbon capture system, meaning that any carbon dioxide that comes out of their smokestacks needs to be captured, sequestered, and dealt with one way or another. The big way that they're trying to make that happen is by injecting it underground. The problem is this technology is also in its infancy. It has only been somewhat successfully deployed in 1 or 2 power plants, and mostly in a research capacity.
They're putting it underground. Are they just piping it down in there? Are they? I know that I've seen some things on 60 Minutes or something like that where they talk about they're turning it into concrete and then putting that in there. Is that basically the way that they're going, or?
So you can actually go ahead and inject it in concrete and sequester it that way, but at the scale at which it's being produced, that's not feasible for sequestering all or even most of it. They are quite literally taking a pipe and injecting it back into the earth.
With the idea that somehow the earth is going to filter it out?
Oh no, it's supposed to just stay down there.
It's supposed to just stay down there.
It's supposed to. We'll see how that goes in about 20, 30 years.
Meanwhile, they're cutting back on the ability of the American people or the American industry to actually produce energy, whether it be from the coal, whether it be from the nuclear or from the green side of things. So then what has been their idea of what is going to produce the energy needed in order for America to operate?
Nothing. They don't actually have a plan here. They well and truly don't. They say, oh, it's going to be solar. Oh, it's going to be wind. And look, solar and wind absolutely have their place in the energy mix. They do great work in certain areas of the country where it makes a lot of sense. The problem is it doesn't make a lot of sense in other places. There is no backup here. It is throwing out the baby with the bathwater and saying, we'll have a new baby with bathwater later.
Well, that's just a little bit frightening to hear. We're going to cut everything back, but don't actually have a plan as to how we're going to fix it. Well, that's encouraging. So what is the hope then? We have the elections coming up in November, and without actually politicking, I guess the basic idea that is if President Biden wins, then we're going to see more of the same, more cuts, more demands for the green energies to come through, even though the technology has yet to reach a place where it can. And if President Trump were to come in, then we're thinking we're back to the days of drill, baby, drill.
Our best hope is to have the states stand up against these regulations, challenge them in court, have the injunctions, and have them struck down, so that we can go ahead and actually develop a sensible energy policy.
Well, would that be a nice thing to have, at least for the first time in a few years? It's a scary thought, but I thank you for joining us today in the new offices, the new setup. Hopefully you folks are enjoying it. But please stay tuned and join us again soon for another breakdown with the American Legislative Exchange Council.